that the project officer of Project Citron, POP Citron, requested ratification from the PCB for the SSM selected. The PCB ratified the selection of the Aerospatiale MM40 missile. This decision is to be recommended to the RP team. I presume that's the Industrial Participation Team. Chairman for action, POP Citron to take note.
What is the import of what is recorded there in your understanding?
Sorry, could you repeat yourself?
What is the import of what is recorded in that paragraph in your understanding?
It's this. It's an introduction to two things. One, an analysis of the Corvette price and how it got down to the original. Well, not to the original, to the final figure, as well as my addressing the point of how that was done, specifically in respect of the surface missile point.
Do you want to deal with that aspect now, or is this an aspect that you deal with later in your evidence?
Sorry. That is a separate theme that I address separately. Unfortunately, and believe me, I am also trying to do this in the most effective, I won't say the most efficient way possible, but I have to address issues as they come up in the documents. I'm trying to make them chronological, but I don't. If we ventilate the point here, it will save us going back to the point. So if it comes up here, it's better to address it now than to work backwards and forwards. I am trying to work mainly forwards. If I may, I can now come to point 16, and everything here is related or relevant, not just related to the IMS as well. These are not just base-sake, as one might say in Afrikaans.
Yes, you're dealing with the best and final offer.
Right, we have been dealing with the best and final offer, and we're not quite finished that point because we're still going to get to the two letters, which I mentioned much earlier, and as far as I know, have been pulled out of the discovery schedule. Copied, I presume that's why Advocate Sello is not here. Those have been copied, sufficient numbers of copies, so we will address that at the right point. But we've been talking about the BAFO, and if we go down to halfway through 16.A, the project officer is on record of saying that he believes that the combat suite price could be reduced to less than 2.6 billion, and that is true. But basically, the price at this stage is 2.6 billion, and that is, despite other than 1 million, was the final price agreed to. It is interesting, and I think we ought to still come to those minutes. The previous minutes of the PCB was the 24th of April, and at that stage, the price of the combat suite that was on the table was 2.3 billion, and the project officer reports to the PCB that he is hopeful, for want of a better word, that the price can be still reduced substantially further. I think if one does the arithmetic, down to about 2.1 or so. But anyway, this is now May. The interesting here is we have the chairperson who is, as you mentioned, Advocate, that is Chippy Sheikh. I haven't seen, what I was actually looking for when I lost you for a second was a statement of recusal. I haven't seen that. It might be here, but he's certainly being involved in the Corvette combat suite discussions and deliberations. In fact, if one may say so, going backwards to the surface missile, that looks like a decision, and I haven't seen that the chairman at this stage is none other than Chippy Shake. I might be wrong, but that certainly seems to record decisions. Nevertheless, at this stage, the chairperson indicates a cost of 6,6694,61 billion set aside by the Department of Finance in the affordability study documents presented to the Cabinet Subcommittee. And a combat suite price of 2.6 billion was indicated in the affordability documents. Now, to being very frank, I had absolutely no idea at the time anything to do with an affordability report or an affordability study, but putting it in the correct context, this affordability study has received quite a lot of attention in this commission and seems to be a matter of great sensitivity amongst various parties. But be that as it may, I'm only addressing it in terms of what the chairman says. But I have to be honest, I find it of great interest and import that a price for the combat suite of 2.6 billion is indicated in the affordability report. As hopefully I am trying to adequately portray, I do know quite a lot about how the prices were derived, and I have never seen anything whatsoever that might indicate a price, an acceptable price of 2.6 billion for the combat suite in the affordable. In fact, it's actually amazing, for want of a better word right now, if and it's very much on the record. The DOD made it so clear to us in fora where I participated that the ceiling price was 1.47 in those financial terms. It was not to be exceeded under any circumstances whatsoever, other than possibly rate of exchange, which took it to 1.9. So quite where a price of 2.6 billion suddenly pops up with, it's okay, to be frank, it's clear that there must have been other activities that are not on the record anywhere that I've ever seen in my own investigations for other than the purposes of this commission or this commission itself, that shows that there was something going on that was going to indicate an acceptable price of 2.6 billion. In fact, all the indicators are exactly to the opposite. So that is that's an important thing for the Commission in the greater scheme of things, not only in my own particular theme regarding the IMS. If we come to the next point, B, we've been talking about price negotiations. The chairperson again instructed the project office to complete price negotiations first. Once this is done, project officer to return to the PCB with further presentations. Anyway, as we will see into where we've just come from and where we're going, the price is indicated of 2.6. There never seemed to be any further negotiations whatsoever. In the last item that I mentioned just before T, there was an indication of a 2.5 billion. There were a couple of things missing from that price. It ends up as 2.6. So it would seem on the face of it that there were no negotiations. Clearly, in my own view at least, once the affordability price was indicated as being, let's call it for want of a better word, the benchmark, that was acceptable to all and sundry, and that's where they stayed, and that was where it was signed.
Earlier on, you spoke about the surface-to-surface missiles, which were reduced. I see under paragraph C there is mention made of the purchase of missiles. Does that have anything to do with the price in the manner in which it was finally arrived at?
Absolutely. In my view, which unfortunately is partly obliterated by what you legal people call redacting, what I call severance, my partial view shows that there was something done regarding the missiles that brought the price down to the 2.6. But we'll come to that separately. The next point, if I may, is under 18, which addresses again risk areas. Risk is tremendously important. In fact, it's almost a fundamental issue of my whole evidence. Anyway, it's highlights and risk areas. Chief Executive Officer of Arms Corps wanted to know why the local industry quote had fluctuated so much. The chairperson stated that the contractors had double accounted on certain line elements. In brackets it says i.e. risk, but this had been subsequently removed. Item closed. Well, sure, maybe ADS had double accounted. I don't think it is the local industry had double accounted. I think that they had single accounted. But if I may emphasize the point, we had zero accounted. ADS were multiply accounting for markups, as we will come to later, in markups and provisions and risk, etc. But that is why this price jumped from 1.9 to 3.9 and then had to be fought back to 2.6.
That then deals with the issue of the combat suite in this meeting of the PCB. Is there anything else you'd like to deal with here before we go to what you set out in your statement in paragraph 230?
If I may, I'd like to. The Project Control Board minutes invariably consist of the minutes itself, as well as various annexures, and more often than not, it includes a presentation made to the Project Control Board, and certainly in some instances that same presentation was made to the Naval Board as well. My understanding is that normally the Naval Board was held prior. But if we may, for point of documentary proof, I know that there's no onus on a witness in a commission of inquiry to prove things. But, of course, it has to be my intention to, as far as possible, point things out which were on the documentary record, and preferably not as my say-so, but as the de facto truth according to the documentary record. So if we may go to what is the 7th page of my of my document, which are the minutes, and if I go to, I think, yes, we are talking about Appendix A to the minutes.
That is page 979 at the bottom right-hand corner. Appendix A is dated 31 May 1999, is that correct?
That's correct. Now, even though that date is after the meeting, it does say, I think that's when it was administratively appended, but you can see it says a report to Project Control Board, 27th of May, 1998. It says that at the top.
It also records the best and final offer received on 24 May 1999. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. All right, so if we go down to somewhere down from the top, and there's a heading, offered combat suite. There's two bullet points there, and the first bullet point says 2.964 billion rand. So that was obviously the first one. It says our expectation was less than 2.6 billion, derived from our quote of the 7th of April 99 of 2,775, reduced by at least 175 due to lower prices for the FPI, which stands for foreign procured equipment, including the radar, that's the surveillance radar, sonar, and missile segments, as evaluated and selected in late 99. Now, there are two reasons why I'm highlighting this. Is again the point of the missile. Now, this is specifically the only missile that was being acquired as a foreign procured item was the surface missile. The other missile was a local South African segment. So that is obviously, there is something valid there, and it also shows, it proves the expectation was less than. I think I've said in quantitative terms it was substantially less than 2.3 or 2.1, but again it was left at 2.6. If page 8, right at the top, it says GFC ADS informed that BAFO is unacceptable and given until the 26th of May to respond to our concerns. So that's what I'm going to be addressing in these documents that hopefully Advocate Sello is going to get for us quite shortly. But if I then come again to the second bullet point on that page, we come again to Combat Suite, and I'll just give myself a break there.
This part of the presentation that deals with the Combat Suite relates to something that you've already given evidence about. Is that correct?
Sorry, may I ask you to repeat that?
Say this aspect of the discussion in this report dealing with the Combat Suite provides for the evidence that you have already given before the Commission regarding the price and stuff of the Combat Suite.
Yes, I have already addressed the evidence in general, but I'm not repeating myself. There might be repetition, but there are specific aspects or items that are not being repeated that I'm addressing. So I'm not doing this for the sake of repetition or emphasis here. It's unfortunately, and it's also unfortunately the title of one of the books, The Devil is in the Detail.
I see that I think in the third bullet under the discussion on the Combat Suite, there is something about the DASOL database now being offered in place of C2I2. Could you just tell us about what is set out there?
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is exactly the situation, and here we are seeing it in documentary form, so it is kind of a proof. But starting at the top, the bullet point there, ADS's response was 2,634. Now that's where we were before, was close to the 3 billion. It's the two letters that would address it, the price coming down to 2,634, and it's so important of how that was achieved. Okay, so the offer is reduced by 330 million. Large amounts still outstanding, e.g. errors in calculating ADS selling price to us for aerospatial missile. Now that's quite an important thing. Errors at this late stage of the BAFO of coming to an acceptable price. We're not talking about rands or even millions of rands here. We're talking about hundreds of millions of rands. Very important point, just to show that I talked about the conduct of ADS and Thompson, but you'll see in the regularity or otherwise of this process, which is a terms of reference for this commission, of how the price was calculated. Here, they talk about the Thomson Marconi sonar exceeds 80 million rand. And we'll discuss this issue today. I think I'm going to show you a spreadsheet of the final amount, where that price of the Thomson Marconi sonar is more like 160 million rand. And I will actually show a letter from Thomson Marconi sonar to ADS, where it puts that in graphic perspective of how these prices were actually, how can I say it politely? It's probably impossible, so I'll leave it at that. If I may, if I carry on you call it Dassault as Dassault, pronunciation is obviously important. The Dassault, my French is not good, but the data bus from Dassault now offered is, as you say, in place of the C-squared R-squared bus. I have mentioned it before. Dassault bus got somehow onto the record in April, but without being costed. So at that point in time, the IMS was the selected one or the chosen one. And clearly, it's the issue of risk-driven price is what's caused the Dassault data bus to now be offered. But importantly here, it's being offered without there being any formal basis therefore. As it graphically states here, on the 27th of May, the project team is still waiting for its specification and the architecture implications before this can be deemed acceptable. And I'll come to quite shortly, hopefully, is only about 2 weeks later, on the 3rd or 4th of June, are the people from Dassault, actually to Texas, in the country to have a work group with a subset of the joint project team to discuss these so-called specifications and the system architecture implications. There's a whole report that comes out of that process in June. I can say at this point, because I know it is a discovered document, and certainly in the discovery schedule, but strangely, that the specification, this document, this presentation refers to full specification. The specification for the database was only written for its first time on the 26th of June. That's 1 month later after this. And in fact, even more and slightly offensively to me, the specification is for the information management system. But to me, as a expert in system engineering, system acquisition, at least at a certain level, that it had, having been now replaced the IMS, which was a child that had been fed for 7 to 8 years, had been in for 7 to 8 years of development, it had gone through formal baselining at its own level and the combat suite level. It existed that you could touch it. It was not a technology demonstrator. You could come and kick the tires, as they say, in our laboratories in Cape Town. You could take photographs of it. It wasn't just paper. That it could be replaced by something as immature as the Dassault database is, what words lose me at the moment, is amazing. But even at this stage, the last point is contractual responsibility vis-a-vis subsystems not precisely defined or acceptable, awaiting further input from GFC. So I think that puts it in the context of the DoD and the acquisition authorities at that point in time.
Now, in the following pages, there are figures supplied with regard to what I believe to be the best and final offer that was submitted by ADS. Is there anything that turns on those schedules that appear on the pages following what you have been looking at?
Okay, I have a highlight on page 9, and I think you've got something, a PDF mark around local elements of the combat suite Is that the one you are referring to? Okay, to try and speed things up. On the 9th page of my document, there's a page that starts off with ship platform, and it's got some price, 3.764 billion, and underneath it is the price of the local elements of the combat suite.
That's the page I was referring to, page 981.
Yes, indeed. Indeed, these figures are extremely indicative and meaningful in every sense of the word. If we're thinking about now a 2.6 billion rand combat suite, which is 700 million rand higher than the accepted, even adjusted upwards ceiling price, we can see how this was derived. That's the one aspect. The other one is, even if I may use the term Mickey Mouse, the Mickey Mouse element of the IMS, it's not Mickey Mouse functioning wise, but it's Mickey Mouse cost wise by comparison. We're talking about our price of 38 million, ADS's price of 44 million after it added its part. That's excluding VAT. Even if you took the 89, or say the 77 million rand, excluding the IMS study, and then you take the 10 or 12 million rand for IMS to get to the 89 million rand, okay, it pales, that price pales into insignificance of these other prices. And I will venture an opinion right now, or when I come to it in more detail, of why this all happened. If we look at the table starting with local elements, the element starting with main contractor, African Defence Systems. Actually, this supply wasn't only ADS, it was this, and there is a detailed spreadsheet which we'll certainly look at. I don't want to belabor the point or even anybody's time. But this is the main contractor is here, the consortium, or this, no, let's say it's not consortium, it's the amalgam of ADS and Thompson. This first element is the main contractor responsibility. I presume there are both project management and some system engineering aspects in here, but it comes to an amount of no less than 234 million rand. Okay. The next point, system integration, and this is more graphically shown by the spreadsheet that's relevant to this point, of 187 million rand. So, if you put those prices together, it comes to, I think, well over 400 million rand. And that is the cost of having ADS and its new partner, Thompson, of doing this. Now, it's important to compare where the DOD was expecting. We talked about price expectations, where those expectations were coming from. Okay, in the letter, there's a point regarding project management. But this certainly includes project management. But system engineering and project management together should probably have come to no more than 150 million rand. And I know, because I was involved in this, we also come to the BAE SEMA ASM theme, where I was addressing this point at combat suite level, okay, in a different context. But I was certainly very, very familiar with where prices lay. So I'm not saying this purely from a third-party viewpoint. I was involved in this process, not this particular process, but related, or directly related to it. So here we have the total amount of main contractor integration and integration, grand total of more than 400 million. Then the integration segment of another 119 million. Quite what that was, I don't know. The combat management system of a total of 335 million. And you will see from the documents, the record, in fact it might be a previous presentation to the Project Control Board minutes, when they were ventilating the wires. The cost of the combat management system that had been baselined from Altec Defence Systems, which made up the 1.47 billion adjusted upwards to was 90 million, or 90, maybe 95 million in one particular. That, for the combat management system, that jumped to no less than 335 million rand. The other prices are for the true local contents. There are large amounts of money, like the surface-to-air missile set is a big chunk of 332, and the other big local thing was the tracker segment of 280. These are certainly big amounts, and these are amounts including risk. I can't venture much an opinion of how fair all those were, but I certainly, want again of a suitable word, the figures that I've just ventilated now are I am incredulous as to their magnitude. A very other important point, foreign elements. We'll come to the sonar system a little later. Previously they were talking about it being over 80 million. And I think that was questioning why it was over 80 million, but I'm just speaking to the documents as legal people say. But here it is 120 million. 120 million is a lot more than 80, it's 50% more. Certainly a document I have to refers it to, I think 160. It could have come down, I don't know. But here is something also pointing to this price of the anti-ship missile, or the surface-to-surface missile, of 390 million. Now, even that is a lot less than if one was taking into account the full original scope of supply should have been 32 missile rounds. And rounds don't fly off the missile by themselves. They fly out of a missile launcher, which has to be, in fact, I think it's 2 per system, and each missile launcher gets controlled by a missile launch system. So there's onboard equipment. So if you put, and from my own estimates in the BAE SEMA ASM endeavour, the price of that was more like the region of 500 million. But at this stage, I'm pretty sure that to reduce the price, there's a lot of documentary evidence showing the instruction to reduce the total number of missile rounds from 32 down to 17. That's 16 for the ships, plus the one round for system qualification. I'm pretty sure that the 390 is a reduction already from the full scope of 32 rounds. But there is documents that show the amount paid. And I might be wrong. I do not know for 100% sure. But it looks as though the total amount paid for the missile system was 181 million. So it would seem to me is that the reduction of this price of 390, which looks to me like a reasonable amount, was reduced by some mechanism, which I want to address in that particular theme. Okay, carrying on. If we go down to the next point, which is the next page, I think, starting surface-to-surface missile evaluation. And I think this is where the decision actually was made in this particular Project Control Board meeting, or at least it formalized, and then formally ratified at the next the special Project Control Board meeting of the 8th of June. Anyway, we can go down to the recordal of it. It looks as though 3 missiles were evaluated, but it specifically says, and this is an important point, it might be small, detail, but the selected missile was the Aerospatiale MM40 Block 2. And that was the Block 2 missile rather than the Block 1 missile was approved. I come to that point where I can prove that only 9 Block 2 missiles were actually acquired, certainly in this phase of the project, or the first phase. Maybe other ones were acquired later, I don't know. And I think 7 Block 1 missiles were acquired. But here we can see a formal part of the process, the Block 2. The ANF is, I think, a reference to the Advanced Naval Missile. I think that is an acronym for a French acronym. I'm not going to try and speak French because I can't, but it was called the ANF at this particular phase, but my understanding is that it actually became the Block 3, which the French Navy uses and various other Navy uses, but certainly the South African Navy does not use. So the approval of the ANF is certainly never filtered down to any relevance in the South African Navy.
If you turn to the next page, 983, there's discussion there with regard to the SSM selection. Does anything turn on that?
Indeed, it does. Here is the one table I'm looking at. It might not be the next page, but I can see tables and not pages. We have, we know that from looking above, which I won't go back to, only 2 missiles were evaluated. The MM40 Block 2, with the emphasis on Block 2, and the Swedish missile from the Saab company, RBS-15 Mark III. And I'm also fairly familiar with this, having been a member of the team, and especially of the Design Advisory Committee. I was certainly familiar with the preferred missile at that stage was certainly the RBS-15 Mark II. I do know at the end of the day it turned out more expensive. I certainly have no truck with that. But in terms of the actual evaluation, there are relevant. The price here again emphasises my point. This is not a price for 32 missiles, which would have come to 500 million rand, and the 32 missiles was included in the original baseline, which would have cost 1.9 billion, I believe. I will be frank to say it is still difficult for me to find out to accept how one would fit 500 million rand into 1.9, but be that as it may, there was 396 million rand set aside for 17 million MM40 Block 2 missiles at this stage. Leading up to my analysis of this, it's interesting because once one starts to quote optional extras, and anybody who's involved in this business knows it's not a nice thing for a managing director to have to do, because it gives away one's prices, and this is exactly what this does. The Naval Board directed the project team to get an option of a price for the balance of those missiles, of 20 missiles, and ADS themselves had provided prices for just an extra 3, and that gives away the price of the missile, of each missile, 52 million rand for 3 missiles. And that certainly gives away 2 things: an indication of the price per missile, and it also gives away, in the next point, of how much ADS was marking up. Because as it says, our calculation for extra 3 missiles from Mary Spatial should have been 40 million. So ADS, Thompson, was quoting their own markups and margins. And I'm pretty sure that the 40 million rand included some kind of markup. That wasn't their cost, that's for sure. So ADS is certainly using their exalted position in the scheme of things to quote basically whatever they like. And as I've said before on Friday, they could quote whatever they like because they are exclusive. There's no competition. Of course, where there's no competition, you quote whatever you like. So that is a very important point as well regarding the theme of the surface-to-surface missile.
Now, I see in the presentation, which is an annexure to the minutes of the PC board meeting of 27 May 1999, that quite a number of issues are discussed there. And in the discussions by the PCB or the presentation, which is annexed to the minute, what appears to be conspicuous by its absence is any reference to the C-squared, I-squared systems, IMS. Was a decision or had a decision been taken by this time to exclude that system?
Well, that's something that actually nobody in the whole world knows. Even my legal team, when we were doing our damages action particulars claim, were not sure when the decision was made. But by inference, one has to look at whether one calls it a low watermark or a high watermark. But somewhere between April of this year, and we're now talking about May, and August, a decision was made. But when it was made is not absolutely clear. Whether it was a business decision or a technical decision, again, is not clear. Because, and I can say that because it's, as you correctly point out, it's not discussed in this minutes of this meeting. And by this stage, the best and final offer had actually been presented 3 days before and discussed at great length the day before, the 2 letters dated the 26th. We'll come to it, but to put in perspective, I think it's at this meeting that there's a request for a decision-making PCB. I think that is, I saw that I didn't, yes, it is on my page 5, so it's the minutes page 5, and it says next project control board meeting. I'll stop to allow people to get to the right place.
Would that be page, the page that has, amongst others, paragraph number 23 schedule, which is our page 977.
Certainly what is correct is that item 23 schedule is the first heading on that page.
Which line are you referring to specifically on this page?
I'm referring to the last numbered point, which is the 4th last line. It's entitled, heading Next Project Control Board Meeting, item 31. The next meeting will be, quote, decision-making PCB of Project Wills and Project Citron will take place at 1100 on the 4th of June in the Zipper conference room on the 7th floor of the Arms Corps building. Now, although it's indicated here as the 4th of June, it actually happened on the 8th of June, and relevant to the point you made in your question, precipitating my answer, is there is no reference to the IMS whatsoever in that decision-making PCB, nor in this one. I can't actually even quite remember whether the CMS is, but we will come to that. but certainly my memory is that the CMS was selected. There wasn't any competition, so it wasn't ventilated in the meeting. In the meeting itself of the 8th of June, it's only the minutes itself only record decisions where there was competition. Where there wasn't competition, the CEO of Arms Corps was directed to write a letter. He certainly wrote a letter where it had the items that, where there was no competition, it had those in tables. I would say from a technical point of view, the decision had been made to select the TAVITAC combat management system at level 3, and in itself, it included the database from Detexis, and that's not why it doesn't even need to be addressed at the Project Control Board meeting, whether it's this meeting on the 27th May or the next one, which is the decision-making Project Control Board.
Thank you. Dr. Young, earlier on you kept on making references to a letter of the 26th May 19...
I'm sorry, Dr. Isabel, are we done with the PCB meeting minutes? Are you done with it?
Yes.
Thank you.
During the course of your testimony and before we adjourned, you intended to refer to a letter of 26 May 1999 dealing with the best and final offer that was delivered on 24 May. You recall that?
I certainly do, yes.
Now, in respect of that discussion, is it correct that there are two letters that you need to refer to? I believe copies of those letters have been made. But for purposes of identifying those letters, can I ask you to go to your documents 0446? Hold on. There is a file that I believe has just been placed before commissioners and I believe our colleagues on the other side. It is file 7. Chair, I believe 11 copies of this file have been made. I believe further copies are being fetched from where they. Do you have these? Do you have the file, Chair? I believe further copies will be made available in a short while. These would be RMY 141. That would be the first letter of 26 May 1999. It appears on from page 2909 of the bundles, file 7. Would you identify this letter for the record, please?
Yes. It is a discovered document with the index number DT1-0446.pdf.
Is that the letter? Yes. Now, the heading of this letter is Response to Questions Arising from BAFO, delivered on 24th May 1999. It's on the ADS letterhead. Do you want to comment?
The RMY reference here. It'll be 190 something, I think.
It is RMY 141. Yes.
141. All right. Would you like me to address this later? Okay. As we know, we did refer briefly this morning to the best and final offer, which is the document referred to just above this. But the one that we were finishing off this morning and ended up on Friday was the letter from the DOD, from Captain Carmam, and the angry letter regarding the unacceptable prices of ADS in their best and final offer. So this first letter, there are two dated the same day. Obviously, there was a meeting going on. It refers to a meeting. There were interactions going on this particular day, and this is a response to the DOD's letter. So I think probably item 8 is where we need to start. Okay, item 8 is under the heading Combat Suite Part. Item 8 says Combat Suite Subcontracting Model. I think the letter, the DOD letter, had said that the model was unacceptable because it offered nothing in terms of a price reduction. Basically, what he said, what ADS PMO knows, I think the author of this letter says our offer of the 7th of April 1999 was based on all South African equipment being supplied in accordance with the principles now established as Part C. Our offer submitted on the 24th of May 1999 grouped the following 7 subcontracts into Part B. So here is proof of what I said is things had been Part C, including the IMS, and now the IMS going into Part B. It had been Part C, and now it's going to Part B, and it includes the following subsystems: the bus, the VSS, which is a video switching system, the TMS, which I think is a tilt measuring system, the ship communication system, I don't know what else he is, electronic warfare system, and the TDS. So for whatever reason, these are now being included in Part B.
An explanation is provided on overleaf that document as to why that happened. I'd like to deal with that. It's on page 2910 of the document.
Yes, this is obviously something I probably read before, but it wasn't that relevant to me. But the explanation is this shift is based on our understanding that the SA Navy wished ADS to assume responsibility for the performance of the equipment delivered in terms of these subcontracts. We shall now adjust our offer to include all South African equipment as Part C. Not making 100% sense to me, but will be that as it may. So unfortunately, that is water under the bridge now.
Might I just remind you, Dr. Young, that when you speak, if you could speak into the mic, it seems the recorder is struggling to pick your voice up.
Okay, I will carry on. If I address the point of project management, I think it gets addressed in slightly more numerical terms in the next letter, but this is certainly a good point of introduction. I expressed my own view if I may say, semi-expert view of the price of project management, and this is certainly something relates to that. Item 9 deals with project management and certainly shows that it was an important point. It says numerous discussions have been held with the project team in respect of program management. The most recent of these was at Mount Edgecombe and involved Fritz Norkier, Christian Grimaud and Daniel Klein. The latter are senior managers of Thomson CSF. During these discussions, ADS openly detailed its costs down to the level of number of people, rates and material, both in South Africa and Europe. These discussions did not result in ADS considering that they could reduce the price of this item due to the following. The price is based on Thomson CSF/ADS extensive experience on numerous programs of similar magnitude. To the number of subcontracts to be managed has increased substantially since our original offer made in February, March of 1999.
A discussion of the IMS appears at item 13, which is at page 2911 of that document. Would you like to take us through that one?
Yes. We've talked about the price of 77 million, but item 13 says the information management system. The current price of 77 million is based on a formal best and final offer received from CCII Systems dated the 14th of April 1999. The increase in price is due to an increase in price quoted by CCII and the moving of IMS from Part C to Part B of the contract and specific terms and conditions in the CCII offer. Now, I'm afraid to say there's a couple of serious problems that I have with this. The first, as we have seen from the angry letter from Captain Karmerman, in this particular context, he actually talks about it being a wrong price. It was for 5 systems. And that is 100% correct. I think what is also incorrect is what ADS is saying here, that our price is from the 14th of April best and final offer. I think that that's untrue. I certainly would be able to prove it, but I think that the 77 million was derived from a price that we issued to ADS on the 22nd of December 98, where they increased the scope of supply and the technical baseline. Because what I said earlier, it seems as though they didn't even bother, although they bothered to send us a best and final offer and in April, and we responded and we reduced our price accordingly because they also reduced the scope of supply, which allowed us to reduce our price from the excluding VAT price from I think it was 48 million down to 38 million. But they leave in the price. Now, quite why they did this, whether it's inadvertent, I don't know, but they certainly had plenty of opportunity. And any contractor at level 4 worth its worth and its salt here, managing basically the future of its subcontractors, is not entitled to be making mistakes of this magnitude. So it's difficult for me to believe that it was made by mistake. But so they've made 2 mistakes: the price of 77 million, as well as the reference to the 14th of April. Again, in the second, not bullet point, but dash point, it proves my point about the IMS having been moved from Part C to Part B. And just to re-emphasize, taking a second, and that is because clearly the IMS was moved out of the combat suite level into the combat management system level, which then became clearly a Thomson ADS part of the scope of supply. And here is something that I alluded to, unfortunately, was a small point. Again, I think ADS talking nonsense here, because from what I can remember is when you talk about prices, you talk about prices being with respect to a baseline being in financial prevailing terms, and the baseline term was the May 1998 offer, and our prices for, at this stage, not only the IMS but the NDSNS were based on rate of exchange. And I think that they took it upon themselves here to again boldly just refer to specific terms and conditions. I think what they're referring to is the fact that we used the initial rate of exchange, and to keep the baseline the same, we kept the same one. But I think that's what they're referring to. But again, of course, it adds more grist to the mill of why we're not being selected.
Is it correct then that you never offered a price of 77 million for the IMS?
That is for sure. There is a spreadsheet, and we're not going to go back unless we have to. But the price of 77 million, which I think excludes VAT, basically was derived from our 22nd of December price, which was 48 million, excluding VAT, and then ADS was allowed to add on some markups for maybe margins, because there's a difference there, and for one of the things was for integrated logistics support being executed at system level rather than subsystem level. So its price, from what I can remember, came to something like in the 50. I'm working from memory now. Then at that stage, their first iteration of risk took it to 77 million. In fact, that might have been the last iteration of risk, but it didn't include the next point, which is item 14, was the IMS risk study. So, but anyway, the 77 million is their price, excluding the risk study, but coming from our price, but with many, many additions on top of that. In fact, on my own, I don't think I've made marks on my own digital version, which I don't think you have on the version in front of you. I have here in front of me, just to put it in perspective, yes, indeed. In fact, there might even be another mistake on ADS here, because I have got here my proposal 047, dated the 15th of December 1998. We went through that on Friday, was for 44.8 million, including VAT. My proposal 049, dated the 22nd, that was a week later, which I've just talked to now, was the one for 54.9 million, including VAT. My note to myself here was that second one, at least, it was in respect of ADS's request for quotation, was for 5 systems, where it should have been for 4, and that's the mistake, which Admiral Comman talks about in his letter. And the 5th system was what I call what they brought up for the very first time, the IQA reference set, which is for ADS's own integration test bed, other than what would have been the Navy's or DOD's integration test bed, which is called the RTB. So, right, then that got excluded. So the price, including VAT, went down in my next proposal, formal proposal, which I don't think we've addressed, was my proposal 051, dated the 27th of the 1st of 1999. It was for 42.6 million, including VAT. And my note here is included lots of NICs, those are network interfacing cards. Those are for the changed technical baseline, which is for the FDDI information management system also being included as part of the TAVI-TAC combat management system. That's why that price went up. And then the final price was not, as they say here, on the BAFA received from CCII, and they actually mentioned here, CCII/prop/51, dated the 14th of April, no such thing exists. It actually was my Prop 051, prop being proposal, dated the 14th of May, not of April, of May. So this was just 2 weeks before. Why that's necessary, because of course there would have been no request for best and final offer, leading to a best and final offer on the 14th of April. So if analysis of my evidence gets done, it'll be confusing unless I put that on the record. It's not that I'm trying to belabor the point or take time, but it was based on a request for best and final offer, I think done the very day before, the 13th of May, with a response back date for the very next day. Clearly that gave us a very short time, but we did respond with a VAT inclusive price of 44 million, 44,3. Okay. So here we have our 44,3, excluding VAT, which I think equates to 38 odd million. I'm not going to try and do the arithmetic right now, of transforming to 77 million plus the 12 million for the IMS study. Now, if I may at this point briefly address the chairperson's point to me on Friday. He said, well, you know, if we have a case where there's a nominated contractor and on the basis of price, the two parties can't become ad idem. I think in contract law, there's the principle of a meeting of the minds of the two parties. There can be, you know, a fundamental thing of a contract, of course, the contract price. And my response is, sure, if the two parties couldn't agree. But there was no agreement from our side. This was pretty much a one-way street. We being asked for offers, and we responding with offers, and we asked for best and final offers, and we responding with, and the baseline just changing without our certain reason why. So I think, you know, it proves my point is that ADS had no valid grounds to say that our price is unacceptable. They just did what they liked in terms of moving our price. I mean, even when our price went down, their price went upwards. Maybe it was a mistake, but it doesn't matter. In what the Navy, sorry, not the Navy, the DOD was confronted with was our price going up. And it never went down, because at this stage, the IMS was excluded and was replaced by something else.
In item 15 on the next page of that letter, there is a discussion on the system management system, the SMS.
Sorry, I'm going to come to that point, but just to show you the IMS study in item 14 is another redaction, but ADS confirms its best and final quote as redaction. Now, as we see from the angry letter, that the price was indicated as an acceptable price of 10 million. I know that this price was 12 million because we know about the 89,255, and if one does the arithmetic between 89,255 and the 77,157 as indicated above, that is about 12 million. So that was what was being priced for the IMS study. Sorry to have interrupted you.
You can then deal with my issue relating to the SMS on, that is item 15 on page 2912.
Yes, we have dealt with this before, so I don't think that I need to belabor the point, because in fact, now that I look at it, I think that I have not only got this in my witness statement, but I've read it into the record as well. But the second part of that item 15 is probably the nub, is despite we having entered into a competitive price situation with ADS, having been selected based on the price of its 29,647. And what I didn't say this morning, not only did that include the 12,07 addition as margin rather than as markup, there being a fundamental difference, but ADS being allowed more or less 24 hours later to reduce their price from 30 odd million based on their mistake, so they said, of inadvertently omitting to remove the price of something related to the VSS. The VSS of the video switching system is they removed the ILS, that's the integrated logistics support part of that. So they were allowed to remove that, and that allowed their price to come down marginally below ours, but only below ours with the margin added on. But here, lo and behold, just to say that a month later, they've already addressed a mistake, so they say, by removing something. Now they are adding on something related to the VSS. And they say that this capability was removed from the offer on the 16th, as it was not requested in the RFO at the time. ADS was not aware of the scope of the VSS offer made by Thales. Now, if I've seen anything, it's certainly not clear in my mind as we speak. I'm sorry to say, how many years later? Is it 16 years later? But what is in front of us on the paper, they must have at least had the opportunity of seeing the so-called, let's not say it's a mistake because I doubt it was, the issue of the VLS ILS. But in all this time, why was there no ventilation from either party regarding the ability of being able to control the video from the Combat Suite consoles? Now, we even know from Friday that the whole thing of consoles was a point, because it's one of the points of which we got excluded. And in fact, there's the whole issue of us offering our own VSS consoles as well as spares for the ADS console. So the whole thing of console. So I'm sorry to say that nothing makes sense to me here. I think this is another graphic point of ADS being able to do whatever it liked, and now adding something on to its price. Okay, fortunately, to give them credit, the DoD team was wide awake in this one, and the angry letter demands reversion of the price down to the 29,6. But I think I've made my point properly, relevantly, and hopefully adequately, that things were going on here. When they say here that ADS was not aware of the scope of the VSS offer made by Thales, it is very, very, very difficult, being polite, to accept that this can be true. The VSS had been part of the scope, the baseline scope of the Combat Suite for several years now. Now, Thales was not Thales that became Thales from Thompson CSF or THIT. Thales was a privately owned company, not dissimilar to ours, called Thales Advanced Systems, by somebody owned by Dr. Benny Kutzer, and I know him quite well, and he was part of the team. And how can it be possible that ADS could have quoted on the VSS, as we know that they did, on the 16th or actually the 15th, modified by the 16th, without having not only a price, but a scope of supply. But we were able to quote in 2 days, never, ever seeing the detail of that. Between the RFQ coming to us on the 13th, to us submitting a quote 2 days later, on the 15th, when I and my number 2 were overseas in Germany, sitting actually at Blommenfoss in Hamburg at the time, we were able to do that. And if one looks at our quote, you can see how comprehensive that was. And if I may say, it's relevant to point out that GFC, who administered the quote, provided a specification, or let's say a statement of work that was very adequate for the purposes of providing a quote. So for them to say boldly, of course, because they don't say why, ADS was not aware of the scope of the VSS offer made by Tali's Advanced Systems, is, putting it politely, difficult for me to believe, even 16 years later.
In the next page, at item 20, page 2913, a discussion is set out there regarding the navigation distribution system, which also impacts on your company. Could you just take us briefly through that?
This is the only one that we won, and this was won in a straight-out competitive situation, exactly the same time as the SMS, which I've just been discussing at some length here. But just to show, I've talked about the conduct of ADS and its pricing. It goes to the point I made in response to the chairman's point as well. Item 20, navigation distribution system. Now, we've gone through a process here initiated by the DOD. And a navigation distribution system. Now remember, there was no such thing. When I say remember, maybe I haven't said it in this. There was no such thing in the Combat Suite baseline at this stage of a navigation distribution system in NDS. This was a new thing. There was a thing called a navigation system, I think in NSS, and that is what ADS had quoted on. But what we were doing, what we were quoting on here was the navigation distribution system. We have a specific reduced scope of supply, and again, in 2 days, while I was overseas, we managed to put in a competitive bid, which we won, price of 12 million, as against ADS's price of 18 million for the same thing, same scope of supply. To put that in perspective of pricing, why the price of the Combat Suite was so high, why it started off at 3.9 and went to 3.3 and 3 and 2.9 and 2.7 and 2.6, is because the navigation system had started off at I think 48 million and come down to 20 odd million. And that's why we were asked for a competitive bid. But this is graphic to show how we were gotten down to, and then suddenly we see their response in the best and final offer stage. And I'm going to come to a smallish point soon, coming from the Chief of Acquisitions regarding best and final offers. So we have now effectively won this thing. But it says here, under navigation distribution system, the current offer from CCII in my proposal, CCI Prop 55, dated 14th April. Now that is the correct date, not the IMS one, which was the 14th of May. And that is the one where we had the wrong document. It's still got the right RMY reference. We don't have to look at it. Does not comply with our terms and conditions. And here they say, base date May 1998, US dollar 5.5. where they got the 5.5. I think this is now another typographic error because our original dollar was 5.05 in May 98. As far as I remember, by December 98, which was the new baseline, it was 5.98. But again, this is slightly less bold than the last one. I will give credit for that. But it requires some financial adjustment prior to being integrated in our offer. Now, I'm sorry to say, when we quote rates of exchange, we quote the foreign content, the imported content, and all of that stuff. How long does it take an arithmetician with the experience of ADS to get figures onto the correct baseline? So to use that as an excuse actually beggars belief. It would take me less than 15 seconds to do that, to do the arithmetic of it. But that's being used as an excuse to reintroduce ADS's system. Now, I'm not talking about its navigation system in SS, but now this new thing called a navigation distribution system, which it had quoted 18 odd million. I'm not sure, it doesn't look as though there's a price here. But anyway, it also says a risk assessment needs to be carried out in order to add relevant provisions if these are required. The lack of time to properly assess financial and technical implications resulted in the CCIR system not being included in the offer submitted on the 24th of April. Consequently, this offer included the ADS navigation distribution system. Now, we talked about risk and the importance of risk. And we also talked about the whole issue of C squared R squared being evaluated for risk in the cost and risk audits. We talked about my PhD and my MSc being the reason why I didn't add on 1 brass cent for risk. Now here we are, all this time later, in whether it's April or whether it's May 1999. We're far beyond the stages of my IMS quotes. We're talking about the NDS now. Now, if a risk provision was so important, and our ADS alludes to it here, now there's suddenly somebody has to carry out a risk assessment. But we've won this on a competitive quoting process. Fair and transparent. So fair and so transparent now that our prices are now known in the realm of at least ADS, of the GFC, and the joint project team. But if I may ask, where in that request for quote for either the SMS or the NDS, which was put together by the JPT and administered by the GFC, if risk was so important, why wouldn't you ask for a risk provision in brass cents, not added on? So I'm afraid to say by inference, by logic, that point was also simple, unadulterated nonsense. We were never asked for provide for risk then, just as we were not asked for provide explicitly for risk now. That's the first part of the nonsense. The second part of the nonsense is based on risk. ADS take it upon themselves to exclude the NDS, which has now been chosen by the GFC based on the election or selection of the joint project team acting on behalf of the Department of Defense, based on this thing of risk. Sorry to say, even now, 16 years later, it actually baffles my brain of how this could have happened.
There is another letter of that same day, also written on the ADS letterhead. It is your document 0448 and our document RMY 142, still on that same bundle of documents as from page 2916. Do you have that document?
Yeah, I do. I want to come to that. There was just one final point, which is probably, hopefully, a precursor from this letter. The very final point made on the letter we've just addressed, now been addressing, is item 30. It says outstanding information, and I presume the outstanding information had to be outstanding from either ADS's previous best and final offer of the 24th, or what's addressed in the JPT's letter. Because it can't be outstanding, because it says here, see attached schedule of aerospatiale options. Now it's clear that various options were offered by ADS Thompson, and the DoD selected at least one of those options. But not only has that been typexed out of this letter to me, but the cost analysis that's referred to in item 30A is not there, nor the schedule of aerospatiale, which obviously the Service Mission is not being provided. So that has been redacted or severed in a much more vigorous way, not providing anything at all. So I'm saying that because it also is part of the reason why my analysis is maybe not as complete as I'd like to be.
Now that will bring us to the next letter of the same day from ADS, which refers to a follow-up meeting that was held, according to that letter, earlier that morning at the Secretariat of Defense. Now, there are a couple of issues that arise from that letter. One, the first of which is, which appears at paragraph number 1, which says the whole of the South African sub-segment contractors, excluding the IMS, are shifted back into Part C. Does this accord with what you have testified to in respect of the earlier letter?
Yes, clearly, for some reasons not clear to me why certain of the subsystems, specifically, I can see why some of them are like the VSS, a video switching system. I can see why they included in Part B, because they are linked to the rest of the combat suite. But an electronic warfare system would seem to me. But anyway, it's clear now that one of the mechanisms by which price reductions were gained to get it down to this acceptable level from 2.9 billion to 2.6 was excluding all of those South African systems, excluding the IMS. And I don't need to tell you why. I've already said why. Because IMS was no longer part of the combat suite. It was part of the combat management system.
Further down at paragraph 3 of that letter, it is recorded that the bus to be used is now the Dassault electronic one. How does that compare with the spec that was provided or the architecture that was required to be complied with?
Yes, it is an important point, which I'm going to address now, but I don't want to leave out point 2. But clearly now, as I've said before, the IMS had the C-squared, R-squared IMS was no longer part of the, let's call it the offered baseline. Unfortunately, there are many baselines, but this was the offered one. And to emphasize my point, the Dassault electronic Dassault data bus was there as part of the CMS. But I think the handwritten note is in your version of the document. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes.
Now, I am not a handwriting expert, but clearly this is written in handwriting, and it was written at that time because it says full info by Friday afternoon. Now, that's telling in itself, but something tells me that this was written by somebody in the project team who was evaluating this, and I suppose I could I'll put forward names who it could be. I won't do so unless I get asked. But anyway, the question he has written down asked, how does it relate to our spec or to the CS architecture? So the very asking of the question beggars the bigger question: on what basis can it have been included in the offer when it's unknown of how it's affecting the combat suite architecture, and its spec being our spec can only refer to the SA Navy's combat suite. It's called the combat suite requirement specification. By nickname, it's a URS, although the term user doesn't appear, I think, in it. But it's a URS, the 18th of December 98 document, which is our technical spec, and its own subservient spec, the platform requirement spec. So the question is being asked, how does it relate to our specs? And so I would say, in terms of whether it's system engineering methodology, whether it's MODAC, whether it's 147, and I know what those things mean in terms of risk management, in terms of baseline management, in terms of formalizations of first order, second order, and third order evaluations. Now, this would certainly be a third order evaluation, is conformance to a spec. That's all unknown at this stage. So it's being offered by ADS and Thompson based on price, which is based on risk. But it's not based on a technical baseline. It's not based on any kind of formal evaluation methodologies whatsoever. And even though full info provided by Fry, that couldn't possibly have taken place. Because, as I said before, the work group to evaluate the Detexis bus, the Dassault Electronic 1, could only have happened at a very start on the 3rd and 4th of June. And it came out of an internal report, a JPT report, or a sub-JPT report after that. The specification, how do you compare something with a higher level spec if you've got a level 3 or a level 2 defining a combat suite at level 4? How can you do such an evaluation if it doesn't yet have a spec? As I said, that spec for the Dassault electronic bus only came out for the first time. Draft 1, draft 0, draft on the 26th of June. So all of this points, handwriting or otherwise, to the shakiest acquisition procedure that I've ever seen in my life.
You mentioned paragraph 2 of that letter being an important aspect that you needed to address with regard to guarantees, repayment bonds, performance bonds, etc.
All right, I can only see, what you can see is what the document says in English. And what it says in English is no provision has to be taken. Now, this is Pierre Moynot's English. It means no provision has been taken in terms of guarantees, repayment bond, performance bond, or any bond whatsoever. Now, we talked about, you asked me the question yourself, Advocate Sabeko, about performance bonds, performance guarantees. Now, of course, that was at the IMS level, and I was also asked to provide a performance guarantee or a bond for the entire combat suite, or at least that's according to Lou Swan. Now, here he's saying whether it exactly what it meant, one only can do a full-blown forensic review, but at least it points to it, is that price, to get down to that price of 2,50 whatever they mentioned in the previous letter, or the 2,599, they had to actually remove those things. So a whole basis on which ADS is being selected as this level, this Part B entity, taking responsibility for risk, But how do you take responsibility for risk? You do it normally in terms of a performance guarantee or a performance bond, or they talk about performance bond or any bond whatsoever. Repayment bond. I suppose there were some DRP. Everyone hopefully knows what there were DRP guarantees. But he's talking about any bond in terms of guarantee. So that's now seems to have been excluded. And I haven't analysed all several thousand pages of the Amberra Agreement, so I don't know exactly what that means. I'm just talking about this letter by which the price was gotten down to the arm wrestling or handshaking price of 2.599 billion for the combat suite. But if we look a bit further down under 4, they've reduced the price by 15 million rands on the bonds. So they've removed the bonds to get the price down. That's an important point. I think we probably covered point 2 and 3 sufficiently for the moment before we come to point 4.
Let's get to point 4 and deal with it.
Indeed, we probably repeating the foreign procured items like Aerospatiale SSM and the Thomson Marconi-Sana. Now, they again attracted some price premium for some peace of mind of the DoD being part of Thomson ADS's scope of supply, specifically Thomson's, by being part of Part B. That was the previous offer baseline. Now suddenly again, reducing the comfort, they are changed to Part C again, which of course removes that element of risk from ADS and Thomson, and it transfers that risk back into the ballpark of the Navy. And I don't think we actually, yes, we didn't actually ventilate that point, but going back not too far, point 1, where they talk about items being shifted back into Part C, it says here in the simple written English, thus the possible consequences of deficiencies in terms of performances or time schedule would be for the SAB. So it looks as though every single thing in terms of risk, the reality of it is the only thing that ADS was taking responsibility was for the combat management system, which included the IMS. Of course, they would have probably taken risk for the entire integrated system, but certainly by the time they had accepted these Part C systems for integration of the combat suite, they would have made sure that there were no residual risks that could be passed on to themselves. I know I'm getting a bit complicated, but just what I've said, the English meaning is the true situation.
You've spoken about quite a few reductions in the scope of work, which finally resulted in the reduction of the overall price of the combat suite. And these includes things like your program management costs, and in the last line of the first page of that document you're talking about, there appears also to be an overall rebate of some 90 million rand as a gesture of goodwill. Are you able to comment on that?
Yes, I am. But if I may, we just have to address the point of just above that of the surface missile again. Unfortunately, I have to do so, as I've said before, is I have to work by circumstantial evidence because of redactions. You can see another redaction in this point. You can see 3 redactions in front of you, but they all together do at least point in one direction. Or at least, and I can't tell you exactly to the end point to where they go to, but at least the direction is there. But reduction in the selling price of the surface-to-surface missile implies a reduction of the combat suite price, including VAT and CD. I don't actually know what CD. Maybe I'm being stupid, but I don't know what CD. I don't know what it means. Anyway, they've now got they've identified specifically, as I went before, the price of the system is not just the 20 million rand per missile price for 32 missiles reduced to 17. It is the launcher as well. Each ship has got 2 launchers and I think it's a missile launch control console on board, which costs money. It also has to be integrated and it costs money. So they've got a price which has been redacted out for the launcher, and for the life of me, I've not been able to work out the details. But anyway, they've saved quite a lot of money. I don't think they would be bothering if this the residual price was anything like the saving price. So clearly it was a lot of money because they've reduced it to save 37 million rand. In terms of the missiles themselves, as I mentioned before, there was a table which, in my mind, at very least, included different quantities. We've talked about a figure of 3, we've talked about a figure of 17, we've talked about a figure of 20, we've talked about a figure of 32. So that's obviously some of the options. But I've got a little bit of arithmetic in front of me, which you don't have. But my question, I said, SSM saved equals 101. My question to myself is how? I, for the life of me, do not know exactly how. But certainly the fact that some was saved is true. The next 2 points, probably the last bullet point, the connectorization. I'm not going to go into it. It's a small amount in the greater scheme of things, but I can't add too much. But the sonar is something because there's documentary proof of it. I've talked about a figure that the JPT was referring to of 80 million and then an actual price of 120. I thought I saw a reference to 180 million, and here they have been able to save 25 million. So, unfortunately, I have to speculate, but it is a valid speculation, because you will see why when I get to the particular Thomson-Marconi-Sony document, is a price has been reduced, which can only mean that the prices were inflated. But on the same point, emphasize my point on program management. As I've said before, I can't in my mind's eye remember a particular breakdown of system. There's 3 items. There is contractor responsibility, there's program management, and there's system integration. Okay, they're all kind of lumped together in those figures that I addressed before. But the point here, I think, is fairly relevant. Besides, rather than arguing, and I'm quoting now, about whether the program manager is too expensive or any other item, we are in a position to offer a final rebate overall of 90 million rand as a gesture of goodwill from our mother company to close the deal. This figure is based on the assumption that we shall be able to negotiate substantial savings on the subcontractors. Now, that's quite an interesting point of view from my perspective, at least as a subcontractor. So they were going to screw us to get down to something acceptable to them. But anyway, they've now come down from whatever it was, whether it was 2,9 or 2,7, to a figure, as I mentioned before, slightly above 2,6, which was 2,634. And my understanding from what was told to me, and not being on the inside, is that indeed this was the figure that they were offering. But the final figure that was accepted was actually 2,599. Now, head office, the mother company, did indeed offer this down. But Pierre Monod actually decided to offer a little bit more. he offered another 35 million more to get it down to 2,599, which was where they closed the deal. But that was actually done without authorization of the mother company, and indeed, I know because there were negotiations with ADS after this, and we were told by the people who hated us so much that Pierre Monod had offered too low a price, and now they were going to try and squeeze us for price. But basically, the end price, the end game, wasn't based on quantitative methods. It was just done on qualitative methods of just getting down to a price to sign the deal. And that's exactly what happened.
When we come back after lunch, we shall deal with the assessment that was undertaken by the project team of the two systems, which resulted in a technical report being prepared. Will you prepare for that when we return? Chair, would this be a convenient time to take the lunch break?
Have you finished the point that he was making now? I think maybe let's finish this point before we adjourn for lunch.
I think the point has been covered. And
point has been covered.
Yes.
So, okay.
If I may, there's just one very small point that I would
just hold on. We'll adjourn until 2 o'clock. Thank you.
said it in this.
SABC